Next Generation Fellows for the second cohort of the United Nations Foundation Next Generation Fellow Program. And it's also a joy to be with you again today on this special day, which is International Youth Day. Today is even more special because I am joined by someone that you will be seeing a lot more of, Ishaan Shah, the new Next Generation Lead Fellow of the recently launched third cohort of fellows. Ishaan, over to you.
Thanks so much, Inés, and it's great to be sharing the space with you as your fellow co-host. Hi, everyone. I'm Ishaan Shah. I'm lead fellow for the 2025 to 2027 Next Generation Fellows cohort. You might have seen the announcement online, but we've just welcomed an incredible new group of 7 fellows, selected from 6,100 applicants across 160 countries after a 9-month search. And it's truly a privilege to step into this role and to continue the work that you led so beautifully, Inés. So I have big shoes to fill, and the rest of the cohort have huge shoes to fill too.
I'm definitely rooting for you all, Ishaan, and also here to cheer on the work that you'll do next year while supporting where I can.
This new cohort really has an ambitious agenda ahead. We'll be collaborating across sectors and networks to reimagine global cooperation and shape key global processes in the lead up to the final SDG Summit in 2027. You'll be seeing and hearing more from each of us in the coming months. And we also invite you to engage with us, to join our Discord server for timely updates and ways to get engaged with our work.
Now, let's talk about why today's event is so timely. Not only is it International Youth Day, but we are thrilled to be using this moment to launch the third and final episode of the Economy Reboot, our animated series on economic justice, finance, and youth leadership, which we had the privilege of being part of behind the scenes as Storylab Youth Advisors.
And the first episode premiered at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Sevilla, Spain. And the full series explores how global systems, from debt to inequality, can be redesigned through the eyes of a young coder named Jacob. It's storytelling with a purpose, empowering young people to rewrite the rules. And we are so happy to present to you the third and final episodes, now available also on all our social media accounts.
Previously on the Economy Reboot.
Welcome. I am the system.
I am Beto.
I am Doomsayer.
So you're the one rewriting code, aid, debt relief, SDRs, and with one tap, all your little upgrades go away.
My vote rules all. Only a few rich aging countries get a say. I can strike down any proposal I dislike. What is this? What are you doing?
Decisions need majority approval from both countries and shareholders. Everyone gets a real seat at the table.
Rewrite the rules. Fix the debts. It'll all collapse. I run on greed, fear, and control. You'll fail, just like the rest.
I am the truth you refuse to see. The debts are too large, the system too rotten.
Quit pushing your nightmare scenarios. Sure, debt relief can be challenging, but doing nothing is way worse. People are suffering while you spread fear.
Suffering. Pah. If debts are forgiven or conditions loosened, why would anyone trust the system?
It's time for a new narrative, one that puts people and the planet first. The 6 pathways change everything. They advance the global goals with solutions that actually help people. Our hope is louder than your fear.
But the risk? No, you're undermining my core routines, encouraging countries to cooperate.
The world wants a fair system. We are rewriting you from the inside out.
I will shut this whole thing down first. If I can't control the global economy, no one will.
No, It can't end like this.
What? What have you done?
This is a reboot. From now on, you serve people and the planet, and you don't leave anyone behind. Whoa, that was wild. Did it really happen? I don't know. But now I know things can change. If the system is fair and everyone gets a say, maybe we really can all win.
That was incredible. I could see hearts coming in also, so I think you all enjoyed it. I definitely love also that the young person, Jacob, has agency to change things and doesn't stop at the first barrier. So let's take inspiration from that and also reboot the system together. In the next hour that we have, we'll go behind the scenes on how the animation came to life. We'll also hear from leaders, creatives, and change makers and explore how we can rewire the system for future generations.
I love what Jacob said in the animation. Our hope is louder than your fear, and we want you involved every step of the way. So let's start with a quick poll to warm things up. Jacob's dream rocked the system and upgraded it. Which step would you take first to reboot the economy? A poll should pop on your screens, and there are some different responses that you can give. Would you ensure developed countries hit their targets? Would you set automatic timeouts during climate disasters? Reroute special drawing rights or SDRs? Revamp taxation, rewrite fair financial rules with equal voting rights, or change the narrative to put people and planet first and consider country potential and growth? So definitely put in your answers there.
I was trying to vote Ishaan, but I think you and I can't as we're panelists on this call. So we're definitely looking forward to seeing what other people are putting in the poll. We'll give you a couple more seconds to do it as the answers come in.
I'm looking forward to seeing the results of this poll.
And thanks everyone also for putting your flags in the chat. It's really cool to see. I'm definitely a flag geek, so I've been loving to see the different flags of people and where you're joining from.
Great to see you being joined from people all across the world: Kenya, Nigeria, Afghanistan, Zimbabwe, Pakistan. So good of all of you to join us, and hope you enjoyed the animation too. Definitely share your thoughts and reflections in the chat box.
All right, I think we should be getting the results soon. There we go. So, well, the last one is the one that got most votes. 61% want to change the narrative, put people and planet first, and consider country potential and growth. And I definitely agree that also englobes some of the other ones above. And none are not important. All of them are important. And I'm loving the energy already of this call and the interaction. But let's dive into our first segment with two leaders who truly understand what it means to rewrite the rules.
So we're going to head inside the animation with Vidushi Yadav, the lead animator, Joshua Steib, the voice behind Jacob, and a special guest, Lopez, founder of Black Girl Gamers. They'll walk us through how Jacob's story evolved from initial sketches to a final animation. So I hope you enjoy this behind the scenes of Inside the Animation. Thanks so much for joining us today for Inside the Animation, which will be an opportunity for us to go behind the scenes with the creators of the Economy Reboot animation series, which unpacks why our global economy is leaving some people behind and how we can change it. And first, I'm going to start with Jayan. You've built something truly transformative with Black Girl Gamers and your broader work blending gaming, fashion, and media. For those who may not know your story, could you briefly introduce yourself and how you've been pushing the boundaries of storytelling and representation in gaming culture? Over to you, Jan.
Of course, thank you. So hello everyone, my name is Lopez. I'm the CEO and founder of Black Girl Gamers. We're an org that started as a community online and has expanded into the areas of consulting, content and media to heighten Black women's voices in gaming, aiming to keep them safe as well from toxicity and also make the future of gaming more equitable. Ways in which we do that is that a lot of the time we hold workshops in order to help our community get into the industry or get tastes of different areas within gaming so that they can go out into the world and apply for roles. We advertise some of the jobs that are in the industry, like via job boards or recruitment events. We also consult with companies that have characters within their games. And we help consult on terms of like how these characters are represented, whether it's authentic, making sure that, you know, stereotypes or very flattened representations of those characters don't get in order to stop ideals of very biased ideals getting into games that reflect on, you know, marginalized people or parties within gaming. I'm also an honorary professor at Norwich University of the Arts and a consultant in general when it comes to video games and the intersection and transmedia space.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Jan. And gaming in many ways is a space for building new worlds, and so is animation. So I'd like to ask you what stood out to you in the Economy Reboot. Are there any elements that resonated with you as a gamer, as a storyteller, and as a community builder?
Yeah, there definitely were some elements, obviously, that I caught from just the gamer brain that I have. Some of the things that stood out to me was the language. You know, he said he can't, the character, Jacob, I believe, said he can't keep patching this up. And, you know, that is key gamer speak when it comes to like, you know, patching up a game that needs, you know, patches for any kind of bugs in the system. So that's number one. The other thing I think is that a lot of information in the animation highlights the colors of maybe like a cyberpunk-esque aesthetic, which is quite aligned to gaming as well. That was really cool. I think in terms of storytelling, the falling asleep and waking up as well, which was kind of, you know, very typical in those kind of stories, and him waking up inside the computer, inside the system, you know, familiar with that kind of storytelling. So I thought those were the elements that stood out to me as really recognizable from the gaming perspective, but also just from watching films as well. So that was kind of cool.
I think we've all been there when we fell asleep and had a bit of a dream about us being in a video game. So that's great to see those parallels being drawn there. And now I'd like to turn to Vidushi. Vidushi, you are the art director, leading the team of animators on this Story Lab project. I know this isn't the first time that you've created an animation series, and you've told powerful stories of Reem, a young girl fighting climate change in Ethiopia, Matias, a young boy from Colombia saving its nature and future, and a boy Rasul from Azerbaijan working to preserve the Caspian Sea. These were all stories from the global south, but this time your main character is from the global north country, Jacob. So what inspired this shift, and how did it shape your storytelling approach, especially when tackling such complex topics like global debt and economic justice, particularly for a youth audience?
For sure. Thanks, Ishaan. So yes, our Jacob is just like a typical teenage boy from global north, and he's just fed up. He's reading all these news reports about how unjust the system is, especially for countries in the global south. And he has this moment of like, if I can see that the system is broken, why can't the people in power do something about it, you know? And we created Jacob to reflect a kind of everyday young person, someone who might not know all the ins and outs of global economics, but someone who cares, who starts asking questions, and who begins to see how deeply connected we all are wherever we are from. And that's really what we were going for with this story. Not a savior narrative, but a solidarity narrative. And Jacob isn't like sweeping in to fix things. He's learning, he's unlearning, and imagining alongside others. That's the kind of agency that's been missing, we feel. And that's exactly what we are trying to sort of change with Unlock Story Lab. And every film that we made in the past so far, whether it was Reem from Ethiopia, Matthias from Colombia, or Rasul in Azerbaijan, those are all real young people, and their stories are their own. We created them in deep collaboration, and this entire series also has been co-created with young advisors from around the world. And for us, that co-creation process is so important because it gives young people real agency in which, in like how their stories are told. And that shift from being a subject to a storyteller completely changes the narrative. It allows for nuance. It makes the space for rage, for contradiction, for joy, and also like Story Lab actually started from a really simple but powerful belief that young people shouldn't just be characters in global stories; they should be co-authors. And we wanted to prototype a new kind of storytelling that doesn't just bring young people into decision-making spaces, but actually makes them part of shaping what those spaces look and feel like. And for this particular episode, we decided to tackle global finance, which honestly is one of the most complicated and under-communicated issues out there. And things like debt justice, aid system, SDRs, these are huge issues, and they shape the lives of millions. But most people, especially young folks, don't know much about them. Which is why we took a different route to make it exciting for a young person. That's why we leaned into gaming metaphors, used this idea of a VR simulation, and created a stylized, immersive animation world to help make these abstract economic systems feel a little more concrete and tangible.
Thanks so much, Vidushi. And I really like what you said around learning, unlearning, and reimagining together. And I think that's so important when it comes to what this animation really exemplifies. And speaking of the voice and of the story, Joshua, you are the voice of Jacob. Why do you think it's so hard to talk about global finance, especially in ways that include young people? And which part of Jacob's journey felt most personal or real to you, especially thinking about the debates that are happening back home in the global north?
Yeah, I think there are really like two parts to the question. I think first, when we talk about the global financial system, the vocabulary that we use and the language that we use isn't designed for it to be democratic, for everyone to be part of it. And I think we have to ask why. Why is the language just that acronyms are flying everywhere and we don't really get to the actual underlying questions? And I think it's just super obvious because if we actually start to think about the underlying questions of our global financial system, we would have to confront the systemic issues that we have had on, and we would actually have to ask and also reply to uncomfortable questions. And especially for people and governments in the global north, that's just not a place they want to be in. And that's why I think it is made out to be this incredibly abstract and complicated thing that young people shouldn't be part of because it's way above our heads when it actually isn't. It's about simple questions about why do so many countries of the global south have such skyrocketing debt and realizing that it's not because of bad budgeting but because of centuries of extraction of colonialism, climate change, and so many other systemic issues where that were actually created by countries in the global north. And but the second question, I very much remember one scene where Jacob in the episode once again stumbles into like a locked door, and then a little bit sarcastically he's just like, oh, let me guess, the code is privilege. And I think that really hit home because growing up in Germany, it's just something that I never talked about. No one ever talked about the global financial system and about basically the amount of damage we inflict on other countries through an incredibly unjust system that just locks and traps countries in spirals of debt without the ability to actually invest in the stuff that would help for sustainable development. So that just really reminded me that we have to change the vocabulary in order for everyone to talk about the system, and then we actually have to ask the underlying questions of it.
Thank you so much, Joshua. And you're totally right. I mean, young people are already leading when it comes to international reform of the global financial architecture. And also, there are young people who don't really know much about this either. And Jayan, you really spoke to the use of many gaming motifs that we're seeing in this animation series, the virtual world, the boss battles, even a glitch in the system. But from your perspective, what did the animation get right about gaming culture? And do you think that this will help it to resonate more with young people?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the language of patching it up, people within gaming culture know what that means. But I think we also need to understand that gamers aren't just young, and majority of gamers at the moment are quite millennial. So I think there are people who are also in the millennial age group that don't understand what's going on. And I think this using gaming helps bridge those gaps within generations, whether it's the young generation or the older generation that also can understand the language of patching. You know, many gamers right now know Fortnite. They might not necessarily know what Pac-Man was, but that spoke to me. So that was really cool. And again, the color palette, those elements were really like interesting. Keeps it bright, keeps it exciting. When you're speaking about something like money, you know, you don't think of bright colors, you don't think of that kind of engagement element. And I think, you know, just the setting is relatable to anyone that's a gamer. The PC there, or anyone that PC games anyway. The settings right there. You have your PC. You have your kind of doodads all around. You know, he had his little stuff. So I think the design of the art right would appeal to gamers really well. The storytelling again really well because it's quite simplistic and it brings a lot of complex issues, like Vidushi said, it brings a lot of complex issues, but into a bite-sized animation, which I think is a great way to start tackling that gap of knowledge for gamers, not just gamers, but again, young people in general. So yeah, I think, you know, good job, definitely.
Thanks so much, Jan. And I really like what you said around how, you know, this is targeted towards young people, but it's definitely an intergener. It's not just for young people. It's for all generations, for all gamers, and for everyone out there who wants to, you know, start a conversation around reform of this financial architecture, but then also trying to disseminate it in a way that can really resonate with all generations, as you said, which is pretty cool. And speaking of the story itself and the content, I mean, Joshua, when you first read the script, what was your reaction? Were there any lines or scenes that felt like you were actually in a game, and did that help you to connect with the story more?
Yeah, I very much remember very first time when I read the script, I was immediately put back a couple of years because kind of my climate activism journey started in the same way as Jacob's journey into the game. I like by coincidence I participated into like in a discussion in a debating competition, and before that I didn't know anything about politics. I didn't know anything about climate change, and it was just because of the debates that I had to prepare for different climate discussions. And in this kind of research, I went down a rabbit hole of what's going wrong with our world to have those huge issues that no one addresses. And I think that's pretty much the same situation that Jacob finds himself in. But in terms of what's really different to my situation is that Jacob then is actually in the game, and it feels really real because it's not just he's playing the game anymore. He's in the game and he feels as, you know, as if the danger is real and as if everything is happening to him, not, you know, him sitting in the chair, but him in the game. And I think that's a huge disparity. And also that's why it's so important to communicate about those things because young people from the global north don't really feel the burdens of the global financial system and what's it's imposing on societies all over the world that are not in those kind of privileged positions of geopolitics. And I think that's why we need those kind of ways of communicating about it and to feel as if we are part of it and not just sitting in our chairs, laying back, reading about it in an article, but actually being in the game and seeing what tremendous influence young people can have, but also seeing what tremendous influence the global financial system currently has on millions and billions of people.
And speaking of that influence as well, I mean, you know, it's clear that gamers themselves are not a homogenous group. And Jayan, you've worked with studios and publishers to make games more inclusive and reflective of diverse players. So I want to ask you, what lessons from your advocacy did you see reflected or missing from this animation, as particularly in how this animation has tackled systems of power, of identity, and of justice?
Okay, so I think for me, the animation points out the nature of the current situation very well, with information and data, not just sentiment. A sentiment and opinion versus fact is a very kind of thin line and tense push and pull we've had since like social media's come about. You know, people can cast their opinions on things, but you know, it's not always based in fact. And then that can, you know, really warp the minds of some of the younger generation. And it has really like can have really negative effects to other populaces, etc. So I like the fact that this is based in data and the data is included in this animation. I think it's really critical to serve that goal of the animation by having that. It's again intergenerational piece of education, and it simplifies those complex motifs, and the solidarity narrative that Vidushi mentioned is really good. And I think for me, similar to what Joshua said, you know, for the future episodes or future work in this, is what I'd like to see is the why and how we got here, which tends to be the elephant in the room, even within my work. So whenever I consult and speak to companies within gaming, I always speak to the companies and highlight how we got here, where bias, mostly racism or sexism, has played a part, and by whom. Who were those actors? Because it does no one good by just, you know, focusing on the victims all the time and not focusing on the people who are stand to be the benefactors. So as you know, the piece and the prose around the piece on the website mentions the system is rigged, but for me, I say the system isn't rigged. Like, as you mentioned, it's working exactly the way it was designed by the former colonial powers to benefit them to this day. And there's bias at that root, and the concept that some countries and some of their populaces are superior to others, which has helped to inform some of the financial systems that we have in this planet. So I think that knowledge, without being pointed out and without being connected to the current day and age, as to how it contributed, that stands to be lost by the next generation, or the information can be warped and presented to them in another way. And at the very least, not understood to be such a critical part of how we've gotten here to this situation right now. Because what would lead to happen, is that the mindsets of people not being challenged, and people believing that, as Joshua mentioned, countries not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, which is not necessarily true. They've been purposefully designed this way. So there are real engineers and benefactors to the current climate. Who are they? How are they connected? And I think getting to that root of that information, the why and the how that has happened, can help the next generation understand in a bit more detail. We see that in the animation, we see the countries that are affected, you know, so Sri Lanka, Ghana, etc. Who are the countries or companies who are directly benefiting from this? But I think where a lot of young people, and especially for me when I was younger, I disengaged just because there was no honesty. There was no real, like, I know what my family history is. I know where we come from, and what happened, but addressing that as like and who benefited from that, and how that ties to the current day and age, was missing in the simple terms, layman terms that I could understand.
So really getting to the structural causes of why the system was built this way, who the system was built by, and how this continues to perpetuate these injustices and inequalities that we continue to see, harming, you know, as you've mentioned, both people and the planet too. And really, that's what this animation is attempting to do, right? It's trying to bring the real world economics into this. And Vidushi, your visual style in the Economy Reboot is so distinctive. You know, it blends gaming, culture, cyberpunk vibes, and of course, the real world economics. Can you walk us through your creative process? What visual influences, artists, or cultural references inspired the look and feel of these series?
So a lot of what Jayan said about cyberpunk colors and gaming metaphors is really what we set out to do. So I think it really, it sort of worked. We knew that visual style is really important, so it was something we really poured our hearts into. We knew from the start that this wasn't going to be like usual usual animation about money that you've seen. It'll be something completely different. So we wanted it to feel like stepping into the brain of a young person today. And you know, most of us spend so much time online scrolling, switching between like 20 tabs, watching meme videos and UN speeches in the same sitting. So we wanted to bring that energy into the animation. And the whole thing is like, if you see the animation, the whole thing is peppered with internet pop culture, memes, and the chaos of browsing patterns, those random info overload moments when you are learning about debt injustice, but also getting served an ad for cat socks. And it's a bit ridiculous. It's a bit surreal, but also very real, just like our world today. And that unpredictability of the internet became like a huge part of the visual vocabulary. And Jacob's gaming room was also our anchor point for world building. We really wanted it to feel like someone's actual space, messy, personal, alive. So you'll see the neon glow, half-eaten pizza, energy drink cans, pride flag. It's all there, like visual clues to the kind of world Jacob inhabits. That clutter, that mix of personal and political, is something so many young people, I think, relate to. And you can be worried about your future, stressed about global debt, but also obsessing over your favorite show or binging something on Netflix and trying to find your headphones all at the same time. So that chaos, really, we wanted to sort of communicate that world of any young person. Visually, we pulled from a lot of influences, cyberpunk aesthetics, gaming culture, even something like TikTok edits. We wanted the transition to feel fast and a little glitchy because that's how information feels, when you're like, scrolling away on Instagram. But even with all the chaos, we worked hard to make the economic metaphors land, like loopholes as cheat codes and systems as mazes, all of that. That's where I think the real challenge for the storytelling came in for us. Like, how do you take complex systemic ideas and turn them into something visual and emotional? So yeah, the world building wasn't just about style, it was about building emotional familiarity, and especially for young people. And we really wanted like viewers to go, wait, this feels like my room, this feels like my brain. And because once you feel like that, you're already more open to seeing the systems around you a little differently. So we really focused on that.
The chaos, the maze, and even the colors definitely felt like my brain Vidushi. So I think if we can relate to it, and so many more, I'm sure we'll relate to the series too. I have two final questions, and I would like these questions to be one for all of you to answer. And the first is, we are living in a world that's feeling more and more divided, by borders, by generations, by inequalities. So what role do you think that storytelling plays in bridging those divides? How do you see a creative world like the Economy Reboot helping young people connect, feel, and feel seen, and imagine something better together? And I'll start with you, Joshua, particularly on that last question around how do you feel like this animation series can really help young people connect, feel seen, and imagine something better together?
I think there have been decades of wrong storytelling when it comes to the global financial system, and the vocabulary that we are stuck with is kind of just, shows that. We talk about humanitarian aid, we talk about it as if it's some kind of charity and not as if it's just basic accountability. And that's why we need, like all projects and all different communication angles to basically rewrite the story and reboot the system and tell a different story, because the harm of the last decades of this storytelling it's basically just charity of the global north gives money and grants to the global south is just fundamentally wrong. And it also makes it so much easier for countries in the global north for it to be the first thing that's slashed in the budget. And that's why I think we really need to retell the stories in ways that resonate with young people, for us then to realize the urgency of this topic and to communicate it to our governments and to all stakeholders around the world. And that's why the Economy Reboot is, I think, just like a fantastic example of how this novel storytelling could look like.
Telling stories and reclaiming those narratives. Thanks so much, Joshua. Jayan, over to you.
Yeah, so as a gamer, I think storytelling is really key to changing minds and educating. To use a very popular, but maybe becoming a bit cliche example, but Black Panther, that helped really open minds in terms of what cinema can be when it centers people of color, mostly obviously Black people in this scenario. And it opened up the doors not just for more Black cinema, but for cinema across the globe to look and feel different to what we're commonly sold or shown. And so storytelling is the vehicle by which you can get people to understand perspectives that do not relate to theirs. And that is something that why I think this animation is great, is because it does that in such a short period of time, and it also shows someone who quote unquote doesn't come I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't come from a quote unquote young country, but still relates to and understands this is wrong, that is very important, because you need to have those meetings of minds from different places to affect a lot of change. It can't just be on the people who are from young countries all the time, especially if the system is set up with a benefactor. So I think that's great. And the fact that the animation and storytelling is set, again, I say this again, which is really amazing, but paired with resources and information. Storytelling is just an opinion without fact or informed research. And so this animation and all the resources that are also on the page can really help shift and educate. And that's where I think this is not just storytelling, but education via storytelling. So yeah, again, I'm very proud about it, and I think I will be educated by all of these things. So good job on creating something that was just so intergenerational again.
Thanks so much, Dan, and really echo your points there around cultivating that sense of empathy, but also using storytelling as a way to educate. Vidushi, over to you.
I think I agree with everything that Jayan and Joshua said very powerfully. And just to add to that, I also really think that stories are one of the few things that can actually make us feel less alone, in a world which is constantly trying to separate us. And especially if I talk about this series, we didn't set out to give answers. We just wanted to make something that felt real to young people, something that says that, you're not the only one confused or overwhelmed by the world, but you're not also helpless or powerless. And when you see a story that reflects your questions and your reality, it creates a weird kind of comfort. And that comfort builds connection. Suddenly, a kid in Sweden and a kid in Kenya are watching the same thing and thinking, oh, this system is messing with all of us. And that's the magic of stories. It gives us a shared language to imagine something better.
Thank you so much, Vidushi. I'm learning so much from all three of you. And I want to ask one last question to the three of you. And that's, if a young creator is watching this and wondering, can I really make a difference with my story or art? What is one piece of advice you'd give them? And Vidushi, I'll start with you.
I would say 1,000% yes, you can make a difference. And honestly, the world needs the voice of young people exactly as it is, not more polished, not perfect, just very, very real. And I would say that I would say to that person that don't wait to be ready, don't wait for anyone's permission, just start where you are and with what you have, and your perspective, your humor, your rage, your joy, all of that is powerful. Stories don't need to be big to be impactful. They just need to be real. And especially in the time of, social media, one reel, one zine, one sketch, can just, start a ripple effect, and it can change the world.
Thanks so much, Vidushi. Over to you, Joshua.
Absolutely. I think every young person has a massive opportunity to rewrite the story, because it really takes everyone, because it's just such a such huge prejudices and other inherent drivers that we need to rewrite. And my background is in climate, and I've seen firsthand how powerful storytelling is and how much we need it, because in the last years we kind of learned everything about climate change except really how to care, and that's where storytelling comes in, because it makes people relate to what it is, and it makes people feel the reality, not just understand it. And that's why we need one young person at a time, one story at a time, to rewrite the stories, all with the same aim in mind, to communicate that business as usual is delusional.
Thanks so much, Joshua. Jan, over to you.
Yeah, I just agree with the sentiments that Joshua and Vidushi had said. I think the only thing that I would add is that your storytelling doesn't have to fit a certain format. There's also mixed media that you can do. Part of it can be narrative, part of it can be a video game, part of it can be a short film. So don't feel that you have to fit the mold when you're creating. Just create and see what comes out. I think that's really important. And then also to seek support. You don't have to do your art by yourself. You can also find people who share the same mindset or have the same goal to work with you on something. I think community is something that lacks at times. And, you know, I think social media has done a good job of empowering people to create businesses themselves, hence what I do. But at the same time, you never do this journey of life alone. So don't think that if you're needing help, you can't find it within the community. And I know the program has a Discord on the page as well, which where you might find other like-minded people in which you could connect with to create your art.
Thanks so much for those amazing pieces of advices that, you know, as young people, we are certainly not powerless or hopeless or helpless even. You know, we have and already are leading on the front lines. Finding that community is really important, Jen, as you mentioned. And as Joshua, as you alluded to, the power of, you know, just starting action, that having a ripple effect, which will spread across continents, but also across generations too. So really, thank you much, Vidushi, Jayan, and Joshua, for being with us today, for giving us a sneak peek inside the animation. And really encouraging all of you watching today to go ahead, if you haven't already, to watch the Economy Reboot animation series. And we really look forward to hearing your thoughts, your reflections, and sharing more of this animation series with you soon. That was an incredible conversation and such a joy to speak to Vidushi, Jayan, and Jacob about the sort of, and Joshua, sorry, not Jacob. Joshua is the voice of Jacob, about the behind the scenes of the Economy Reboot. You know, I hope these really start conversations about power, about justice, and about imagination. So now it's time for another poll, our second poll of the event. And the main question we're asking today is, who's your favorite character from the Economy Reboot? So drop your vote as well as your emojis in the chat. Is it Jacob? Is it the young country runner, the aging country runner, the system, the doomsayer, or the veto? Inés, do you have a favorite character?
Oh, I think it's a cop-out, but Jacob, I think he's the underdog in a way because there's so much against him. But he's also very aware of the incredibly unjust system, and he's seen it himself. And he comes from a global north country, so I think that awareness, I think, is very important to highlight. And something that Vidushi really said resonated with me, that we as young people shouldn't be characters, but co-authors. And this animation gives us hope through Jacob. That we can shape what the future looks like. How about you? Who's your favorite character, Ishaan?
I would agree it's Jacob too, but I do have to say the Doomsayer felt very much like the systems that we're coming up against and we're trying to battle as young people. It felt very real. It felt very scary, very daunting, but also something that we together collectively can overcome. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing the results of this poll, to seeing who your favorite character was. So make sure you vote and drop some emojis too in the chat about how you're feeling about the characters.
Yeah, I've been loving seeing the interaction in the chat while you had your conversation, Ishaan. Thanks to everyone who's taken the time to share what you're doing, to join the Discord, to be your own Jacobs, I guess, in this world where everything's thrown up against us, but making sure we keep running towards a future that is better. And we're seeing the emojis come through as well. Fantastic. Okay, I think the results are coming up. Look at that.
Results.
Jacob,
Oh,
young country runner, system, and veto. Some agree with you as well, Ishaan. I think all the characters make this story much better as well, and the storytelling there as well. Thanks to those who are part of it behind the scenes. But now it is time to go from the digital world to real world change. Up next is our fireside chat, patching the system, youth solutions in real life. I am thrilled to welcome our panel of distinguished women. Cassie Smith, Senior Manager, Corporate Sustainability at U.S. Public Affairs. Welcome. Naomi Nyamweya, Research and Policy Manager, Education, Financing, and Economics at Malala Fund. Welcome as well. And Nafisa Atiku, NALFM Envoy to the African Union. We will explore in this conversation how the series Futuristic Fixes echo actual solutions young people are fighting for, and how financing can be channeled into investments that address both current and future needs. Add your questions to the speakers in the chat. I saw that there were some people people asking how you can participate, this is a great way to do that. Our team will be keeping an eye out for them so we can pose them to speakers when we get to the Q&A at the end. But to open up, let me ask a question to all of you. Our animation shows a young coder patching systemic flaws in global finance through playful yet powerful visual metaphors. In your work, how are real youth-led movements rewriting the rules on debt, education, finance, and sustainable development? Cassie, let me start with you first.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm so honored to be here today. So I work for Samsung, which is a global technology company. We believe that young people are not just future leaders, right? They are the leaders of today, and it is our responsibility to invest in youth, bring them to the table, and to understand the impact of their work and their perspective for building a more healthy future. So one of the ways that we demonstrate this belief is by empowering young people through Samsung's Generation 17 initiative, which is a partnership with the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. We started Generation 17 in 2020, and we've seen young changemakers across the globe bring creative, tech-driven approaches to solving deeply rooted issues like climate action, education, quality education, inequality, gender equality, and the health of our oceans, just to name a few. So as an example, we work with Renata Kosh Alvarenga. She's a climate activist and one of Generation 17's young leaders from our most recent 2025 cohort. And she's founded a youth-led organization called Empodera Clima, which addresses the disproportionate impact of climate change on women and promotes female climate action. She's a leader in the international youth climate movement, supporting women's empowerment and climate justice across Latin America. And her work emphasizes intersectional approach by making information accessible via multiple languages and elevating women in climate decision-making arenas. So this is just one example for the way that Generation 17 tries to elevate youth-led movements and youth-led work. For me, what makes youth-led movements so powerful is that they are intersectional by design. They don't silo issues like debt or climate or gender. Instead, they see how these systems are interconnected and they really build inclusive solutions from the ground up. So our role in our vision as a global company is how can we support them with the tools, with the visibility and the platform to scale these solutions. And what we've seen over the last 5 years, when young leaders are given access and they're given agency, they move fast and they move together and they bring others alongside them.
Thank you so much, Cassie. And it's great that you mentioned Renata because people on this call will be seeing her more often as well as she's part of the Next Generation Fellows cohort. Let me come to you, Naomi, with the same question. How are real youth-led movements rewriting the rules?
Thanks so much, Inés, for organizing this, and thank you everyone for making the time to join us today. My name is Naomi, and as you have been told earlier, I work at the Malala Fund. I am a policy manager there, and at Malala Fund, our focus is on girls' education, and the work that I lead is specifically on financing girls' education. And recently, we've really been looking into the debt crisis because we see this as such a huge hindrance to the sort of fiscal space. So the fiscal space is really the space for investment or the budgetary room that governments have to invest in their education. And we've been working with young people because we believe that young people are the actual architects of systemic change. And we also believe that they are the experts in their own lives. So when we talk about girls' education, for example, I was in school not too long ago. I still identify as a young person, but a lot of the people that make the actual policies were in school so long ago that the way they even conceptualize a quality education, which then would influence the way they would budget, the way that they would put funds into education is so far removed from young people's lived realities. And so we really try and center youth perspectives as we do our work, and youth perspectives as we advocate and as we think through the sort of policies we would like to see in place. So I can give you some actual, like, solid examples. We have our Education Champion Network, which is the main vehicle through which we do our grant making. And through our Education Champions Network, we have funded and partnered with both youth-led and youth-governed organizations. And these are organizations that are rewriting the rules in their own countries on issues such as education, financing, and sustainable development. So, for example, we have partners in Nigeria that trained girl advocates who are then able to persuade their state governments to remove hidden fees, which were keeping girls out of school. And what we mean by hidden fees, sometimes a country can legislate free education, but free education is not free schooling. You still have to buy textbooks, you still have to buy uniforms. And in low-resourced communities and in poorer households, that becomes such a huge deterrent for girls going into schools. And so our grantees worked with girls to track these hidden fees, to figure out how much this actually is, and to communicate to policymakers what a huge deterrent it is to their access to and completion of schooling. Another example is in Tanzania. The former president put in place a policy that was preventing pregnant girls and young mothers from returning to school. And this is so unfair for so many reasons. And so what we did is we supported a coalition working in Tanzania, which involved young activists themselves, to secure national guidelines, which meant that girls could then return to school. And this had to go hand in hand with some financing. So these are our priorities. How can we fund them? And how can Malala Fund stand behind you and work beside you to ensure that your priorities are uplifted? And the last example that I'll give is we had this global survey where we spoke to 800 girls and young women across 300 countries. And what we were trying to understand from them is what their vision for education is. And overwhelmingly, what we heard from girls is that they want safe schools, which are inclusive and which are free from violence. And so then when we speak to policymakers about education financing, then these are the asks that we're giving them. We're telling them we don't even have enough money in education systems to get girls into school, but we have enough money to get them into schools which are safe, which are inclusive, which are free from violence. And what are the key barriers to this? The key barriers to this is the debt injustice that's happening at this big global level, and how can we shift those levers to ensure that girls' needs and that their priorities are actually met. And these are some of the examples of our own work, but we recognize that we are a small team and we're only able to reach so many young, inspiring people who are creating real change in their communities, which is building into real change in the world. And so this isn't happening in isolation. And so it's great to be here with partners who are also supporting this growing wave of youth-led action, who are connecting the struggles between education, health, and economic injustice. And we have committed over the next 5 years to ensure that 20% of our grants, which are multi-year grants, are given directly to girls or to young women, because we want to give them the resources and the platforms to actually design the solutions that they need, because as I stated earlier, they are the experts in their own lives and they know what real change, what real meaningful change looks like.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I can see hearts coming in and claps as well. And I love the example of Nigeria really showing the tangible change that we can create today, not just in the future as young people. So we've heard from Samsung and Malala Fund. And Nafisa, I want to come to you. Can you share good examples from your experience at NalaFem?
Hi, it's afternoon where I am. So good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, whichever one it is at your time. It's a pleasure to be here and hear from Cassie and Naomi on the incredible work that they are doing. My experience with NalaFem dates back 3 years ago when I was part of the inaugural fellowship for young female African politicians across the continent. And, especially in my role as the envoy to the African Union, we've basically been focused on co-generational leadership. And that was something that was very evident in the NALAFAM summit that we had in Freetown, Sierra Leone, co-generational leadership. Movements are taking shape, people are evolving, people are also passing through. How do we ensure that the conversations of gender equality, of JBB, of things, of issues, of advocacy issues and social justice issues that matter to young women across the African continent are seriously taken into consideration in policy conversations, not just on a national level or a subnational level, but across the continent, especially when it comes to issues of financing and debt financing and how the continent thrives on the whole in terms of economic empowerment. We all know that when it comes to global south, especially when you come to some specific areas of Africa, maybe with the Western Africa, Central Africa, traditionally, at least within the past couple of decades, not couple of decades, many decades, to be honest, if you put things into context, there have been social norms and stereotypes that have disempowered women, especially young women, from being able to access resources like land, like finances and own businesses. I come from Nigeria as well, and it wasn't just up to 10 years ago when a law court in Nigeria said that women in a particular region of the country were now allowed to inherit land, that's physical resources, and that's like even up to 10 years. So you can see the kind of uphill battle that young women and women in Africa face as they try to take control of their futures. And to be honest, no country on its own can thrive when more than half of its population don't have access to financial resources, digital skills to be able to level or upskill their businesses as it's as in whatever sense that you want to think of it. So having and ensuring that co-generational leadership, especially when it comes to political leadership across the African continent, is something that we're really passionate about. We're really excited about. I know, in the last NAFM summit that we had the current president of Namibia, and one of the commitments that she made at the summit last year was to have a 50-50 cabinet. And right now, she has been sworn into office and she has that 50-50 cabinet. Some of the things that we had during the summit as well was to talk about, what are your pledges? My pledge was to train, 500 young Nigerian women in political leadership and self-development, different people from lawmakers to policies to, the Minister of Gender Affairs, the Minister of Justice, to, the CEO of One Africa. Different people made different pledges to uplift and uphold, the women in Africa. But it's really important, like I will keep on saying that whenever we're having these discussions, it's important that it's a co-generational conversation, especially centering young people's voices, because it doesn't just, it doesn't just give young people and young women a voice, it also helps to shape the priority of the conversation. So while you're having a conversation on debt inclusion and climate and taxation, and young people are not in the room, it cannot form the priority of the things that are discussed. But when we are there, we are able to shape the conversation, reframe the priorities, and in Jacob's example, break the code and create a new code. So down to examples, I think there's one, because there still needs to be a lot of education, which is why what Jacob is doing through the video game is really important to me. I learned this from a mentor, that you don't expect your people to come to you. You have to meet people where they are. So, this video game, this artistic way of digital storytelling through all other different ways of the mixed media is a really important way that we can deliver the information that young people need in the way that they understand to them. And there's different divergent ways in which we can do that: spoken word, poetry, whatever it is, rap, music, film, skits. You should go on to like Nigerian social media and see the amount of skits we have. But there really needs to be a lot of education. So we're at that stage where we're educating people about what this is, why it's so important, why it's urgent, why young people should care, and how they should center their voices, because you move from education to the empowerment so that they can take action in the spaces that they need to take action, and of course occupy. So I think that's going to be it from me. I'm going to hand over back to you, Inés. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nafisa. I love that you shared many concrete examples and also how the president went from the commitment to actually delivering on that change that they'd committed to, which is not something we see all the time. And what you mentioned about meeting people where they are. I have one question for each of you. I'll challenge you to answer it all in about 2 minutes if you can, so that we can get to our Q&A. Cassie, let me come back to you. You already mentioned Samsung's work on Generation 17, which you're at the heart of, and it's a global partnership with UNDP that elevates the work of young changemakers through digital tools and storytelling. I'd love to hear a little bit more what inspired this partnership and how you've seen it evolve over time.
Thank you, Inés. Yeah, so absolutely. In 2019, Samsung Mobile and UNDP created the Samsung Global Goals app. So this is on every Galaxy mobile phone. It's a really helpful tool to help mobilize the Galaxy community to gain a deeper understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals and to work collectively towards achieving them. Our idea was, how do we make the SDGs more accessible? We want it right on your mobile device, right? And then in 2020, inspired by the Global Goals app, Samsung Mobile and UNDP took our partnership to the next level, and we created the Generation 17 program to elevate youth voices and support the success of young leaders who are making already an incredible impact across the globe. We started this program stemming from this shared belief that young people have the ideas, they have the passion, they have the urgency to drive real change, and that we can provide the right tools and a global platform to be able to help them scale their impact. So today, Generation 17 has grown into a community of 14 active alumni alongside the current cohort of young leaders from around the world. And they represent causes from climate justice to education to gender equality, all using technology to mobilize their communities and transform people's lives. And I would say over the last 5 years that this program started, we've seen the power of this partnership, because youth are the best people to reach youth. We give them the platform to scale and a voice at the table to drive their solutions, build awareness of their work. We give them access to global summits like COP28 and the UN Ocean Conference. They're developing apps and platforms and, for example, renewable energy systems on the ground. So these young leaders, they've accelerated their impact, they've inspired others, and they're also bringing along those kind of on-the-ground partners in their communities that they have access to as well, beyond sort of our reach. So Generation 17, I would say, started as a digital storytelling platform, but it's really evolved into this movement powered by young people's passion to drive these real on-the-ground solutions, and it's just scaled by our technology and our reach.
It's great to hear a bit about how it evolved, and I loved how you kind of followed the thread that Nafisa started on meeting people where they are and meeting them on their phones and devices, but also letting young people be the ones who reach the other young people as well. Thank you for doing that for all of us, and I think in the chat and on the screen I can see all these emojis popping up. Let me come to you, Naomi. Malala Fund has called for reforming the G20 Common Framework to unlock billions for education and girls' rights. Yet many debt relief systems remain stuck. What barriers are slowing progress, and how can youth-led perspectives change the face of global finance to prioritize learning and well-being?
That's a really great question, Inés, and a really complex one, but I will do my best to keep my response short. So you're right, we have called for the reform of the G20 Common Framework, and that's because it is currently the only multilateral coordinating mechanism that exists to work through sovereign debt. And the thing is that it's very slow, it's very fragmented, and as we saw in the previous animation, it's really led by the interests of global North governments that are able to take their kids to school, that are able to provide healthcare for both girls and boys, that are able to feed their population. And so what we're seeing is that the countries that are facing the biggest crisis are the youngest countries. It's the countries with the largest young population. So these are countries in the global south, and they're bearing the heaviest burden. And what we're also seeing is that countries are spending much more on paying off their debt than they're investing in health and that they're investing in education. And the problem is fundamentally political, as with every other issue that young people are interested in. If it's the issues with wars, if it's the issues with climate, it's just a lack of political will, because we know the levers that exist that can be pulled. We know that there's enough money in the world because wealth is growing so much. There's enough money to take every child to school. There's enough money to ensure that every mother is able to give birth safely. So the issue really is this lack of political will. And I think another issue is a lack of education and the way we communicate. So I'm a policy wonk, and my comfort zone is to communicate in ways that are very complex, to use the acronyms that were spoken about before, and to not be very clear. I'm not thinking about my audience. I'm not thinking about the people that need to be galvanized, the people whose lives are actually impacted by this. And this is why the work that the United Nations Foundation has done with the Economy Reboot is so important, because what it does is it builds a constituency of people that are able to put pressure on their governments, on their leaders, in order to shift that political will, because that's what we need. And governments are not likely to respond to me as a person who works at Malala Fund, but they're likely to respond to the young people in their countries who are having conversations with their parents at the dinner table, who are building this collective knowledge and collective consciousness about these issues that are so fundamental to our lives. And so I think that's what we need to do. We need to shift the way we talk about things. We need to make the stakes very clear. We need to make it clear that when we talk about debt, we're talking about teachers getting paid. We're talking about whether a country is able to respond to climate shocks, whether it's able to respond to flooding, and we really need to humanize these issues. And by amplifying youth-led advocacy from affected countries, we will be able to build pressure within the system so that we're prioritizing learning, we're prioritizing well-being, we're prioritizing climate resilience over creditor profits. So yeah, the big issue is political will, and the way we fix that is by communicating clearly and making sure that people care, so that the people with power can move in the direction that we want them to move.
Thank you, Naomi. I see another policy wonk in the chat agreeing with you. I think what you were saying about the fact that there's enough money in the world to take every child to school and for everything else is something that we need to see how we can leverage to make sure that that money is reaching the right places. Nafisa, let me come to you with the final question from my end before we go to the questions from the chat. We're really thrilled that your organization, NALFM, has joined the Unlock the Future Coalition as a member. And we are lucky to have you in light of NALFM's work to champion multi-generational Pan-African approaches for women and girls. So in systems where these approaches are often sidelined, how can girls and young women's leadership help reshape priorities for education, climate, or sustainable finance?
All right, thank you so much for that question, and thank you to Naomi on humanizing the problem. I took that from your submission. So when it comes to really making sure that the voices of women and young women are not sidelined in the conversation, I think I touched a bit in my previous submission, and that was basically you don't have all the knowledge and the tools and resources and the access and just sit down in one place. You have to find a way to meet them where they are. So are they in the markets? Are they on their phones? For us that do quite a bit of advocacy and policy work in Africa, especially Western Africa, we always have to consider what are the diverse ways that young people are accessing education and information in today's age. It might shock you that there are some parts of the world that are extremely digital, and there are some parts of the world that are extremely analog. So if you go to some parts in northern Nigeria right now, whenever we want to do advocacy with them, how do we do our advocacy? Through creative arts and through the radio. So we pay for radio time and we go and talk about the issues that are important and the education and the advocacy. We host theaters Literally, we go to book like an open space in the community center, and then we do some storytelling through poetry, through drama, and then we infuse the social justice conversation into what we're doing. We print out flyers with the language that's predominant in that particular region. And then when you come to some parts of the country, some parts of Africa that are literally almost totally digital, you're going through WhatsApp, and then through Twitter, through Instagram, through Facebook, through social media, basically. And then that's how you actually get their attention and then bring them into the conversations where that they understand that this is incredibly important and you're amplifying the conversation. I think the next one that I wanted to speak on was access. And I think that's a key thing in my region that we and possibly young people across the country really struggle with. And not just access in the sense of, oh, we're inviting you for this event, or we're inviting you for this town hall, and just come and listen to the conversations, and then after that you go. So that's tokenistic access. Access in a way that translates into action, advocacy, and impact. We are inviting you to the room because your voice is important. We've said it time and time again in this virtual room. Now, when we give young people the access to space, to resources, to access itself into those decision-making spaces, that they change things. We were basically like Red Bull. Literally, we take wings and we fly. We do what needs to be done because we understand that it's about our life. And the thing about sometimes between generations and co-generation leadership that we've discovered is that sometimes the different generations don't exactly understand where people are coming from. So you have an older generation leadership that lived in a different time, have different challenges, and is still solving those problems from their same perspective and that same view. There now needs to be a connectivity or a joining of hands between those two generations, especially when it comes to issues of gender equality, to make sure that the progress that we've done so far doesn't die out, right? That we're extending those hands of partnership with respect and understanding, and we're bringing young people into the room, not because I just want you to be here to take notes, but I want you to be here because your voice is important. We need to center that to actually do the real problem of, problem solving. And, so for me, I think it's, like I said, more of education, meeting them where they are, to granting them access to the tools and resources they need to create change. And then 3, the access itself to the decision-making rooms, be it at the local level, to the state level, to the federal level, to the continental level. Leadership in Africa and globally needs to have a better and more multi-generational face. I think that's where I'm gonna stop at. Thank you.
Thank you, Nafisa. And I loved how you teed up our Q&A perfectly, saying that we want to invite young people into the room because their voices are important. So it is time to face the system one last time by putting your questions to our panel. We've been collecting them throughout the event. So let's dive in. I have a first question, and we have about 10 minutes, I believe. A question from our Discord community for you, Cassie. If you could influence one global decision today to make the digital world safer and fairer, what would it be?
That's a great question. I think technology is everywhere, right? And we need the right people at the table to make sure that the future of technology and the future of the digital landscape is safe and inclusive. And I think that does include bringing in the youth voice and bringing in youth stakeholders that are really hoping to change the narrative around how we build a world that sees people for who they are and doesn't leave anyone behind. So I think there are many mechanisms through which you can do that. I think for us, part of the way that we've started thinking about that is, how do we make sure that in the digital sphere, we're telling the right stories, and we're telling stories of hope, and we're telling stories that actually elevate some of the good that's being done on the ground. How can we find the most effective ways to highlight youth leadership and climate action and climate justice, for example, and then empower collective action through these channels. And I think that's one sort of tactic that we've been trying to take, and I would say a practical output of that belief is our Global Goals app, which I mentioned before, but it's amazing. It's pre-downloaded on every Galaxy device. So it's already mobilized 300 million Galaxy users globally. So it has huge reach, right? And it's an opportunity for us to tell stories, build a narrative around the SDGs, and really inspire action. So users of the app can donate to specific global goals that they have interests in. They can also read about other stories of impact and get inspired for not just, things that are happening in their region, but other areas around the globe. So things like, no poverty or zero hunger or quality education. These are all issues that are mentioned within the app that you can donate towards and read about and support in different ways. And I think that's one way that we hope to provide sort of a tunnel of visibility into how you can, from wherever you are in the world, sit down with your mobile device and think about these topics and think about what it means to mobilize your community and think about some of the inspiring stories of what people are already doing towards that. And one quick fact is that we've actually raised 20 million US dollars for UNDP to fund initiatives that help advance achieving the global goals, particularly in youth and education programs. So I would say that's just one way we're trying to, kickstart some of this change that needs to happen and leverage a community that's already doing the action.
Thank you, Cassie, showing again that we do need financing also to achieve all these things, but maybe all those 300 million people that are using the app don't feel that they're very small, but when you add them up, it actually can create a huge ripple effect of change. Let me come to Nafisa with a question from Karis and Uchizi. It says, financing is a big challenge for youth organizations. What will it take to break down these barriers holding young people back? And what proof would convince the world that young people are already changing the rules of the game, just like Jacob?
All right, thank you so much for that very heartfelt conversation, to be honest. And I'm going to be really, really brutally honest on this call. Financing is a problem for all of us that, own or work in local grassroots organizations run by young people. I have mine, and we focus on young women in Nigeria and spread across Africa. And believe me, financing is definitely a challenge. But recently, I'm going to be honest, that's this year. It's been a very tiny shift that we've seen that financing has started shifting from, the general institutional civic actors or government players down to local grassroots organizations run by young people. Which, to be honest, when I started to see that gradual shift, like I said, it's just this year and it's just like 6-7 months. I was like, okay, let's see how this is going to look in the next 1 year and how we can amplify those conversations. But I would say the data is very important. Data, and we talked about this over and over again, storytelling. And to pick on the point that Naomi also said, humanizing in the form of storytelling, to the policymakers as well, and to the people who are in charge of the development funding, whether it's diplomatic missions, to international governmental organizations, or whoever really it is, or the legacy foundations. Data storytelling in a way that this is the data and the evidence that if you give this amount of funding or financing to youth-led grassroots organizations across the country or within a particular region, you get the work done. And we're not just saying it because youth inclusion is the hunky-dory thing to say, we're actually saying it because it works. Really, honestly, sometimes you have to go to that region. I also do quite a bit of work with politicians, so you have to say that. And then how do you couch your data and your evidence and your point and your debate that you want to pass across in a way that they understand, and it talks that there are slight emotional bonds to say that, this is something that you should care about. People have made, higher level people who run these organizations have made decisions off the bat of, a story or a documentary, or saying, wow, so this is happening, this works. So I think for young people, especially those of us that run, these grassroots organizations where we are closer to the lived realities of our beneficiaries, or we are even the beneficiaries ourselves, right? We do need to be able to gather that that data, be consistent, be resilient with what we're doing, and we need to figure out how to tell our stories better and in ways that our audiences can understand. My mentor used to say something about social media and digital media is like you are the owner of your space. You're not paying rent, really. You just literally need to go to your Facebook, your Instagram, your WhatsApp, your Twitter, and put out your story, and it spreads. So how are we using these tools as well to tell the stories that matter to us in a way that the people in charge know that this is now the demand and this is where the resources and the financing should be going to as well. And just to put it across, political will, not just on the side of politicians, but political and development will. There needs to be a listening ear on the other side as well. So I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much indeed. We're not paying rent in our own space, that's for sure. Naomi, let me come to you with a final question as we wrap up this panel. This comes from Mariam Nama. She said, considering that in Afghanistan, all formal education pathways for girls have been completely closed, what pathway can be opened for them to continue their education?
Thanks so much for that question. And the right to education in Afghanistan is a really big focus area for us at Malala Fund. So with my work, I sit in the global advocacy department, and we have two main pillars. There's the resourcing of education, which is the stuff that I've spoken about, education, financing, debt justice. And then there's the right to education. And our flagship program in Afghanistan is focused specifically on the fact that beyond, I think it's the 6th grade in school, girls are disallowed from continuing their schooling. So what I know is that there are several organizations that are funding secret schools for girls in Afghanistan. And this is obviously not something that you would ever hear about because, as it says in the name, secret schools, and there are huge safeguarding risks. But then there are people that are working on the ground to ensure that girls are able to go to school in the ways that are possible there and then. But we are also thinking a bit more big picture, and I'll speak to our work specifically. We want to introduce a concept known as gender apartheid in international law. And gender apartheid is basically referring to or kind of building on the concept of racial apartheid, where in South Africa, most recently, there was, and in Palestine, there's segregation by race. And what we're saying is that in Afghanistan, we're seeing segregation by gender. And we want this encoded in international law to make this illegal. And so what this then means, if gender apartheid is encoded in international law, then the people that are enforcing this in Afghanistan are then held to the law and are found to be doing something that is illegal, which then means that they cannot be recognized and that relations cannot be normalized. And by normalizing relations, I mean, for example, if the government in Afghanistan is the Taliban, then countries can decide, okay, there's not much we can do, so we're going to continue to trade with them. We're going to continue to enter into agreements with them. And what this then does is it emboldens the government to continue this system of gender apartheid. So by thinking about the big picture, the big system, our first step is to encode gender apartheid in international law, which then means that the Taliban is held to account, which then means that in the long term, girls will be allowed to go to school. So those are the two things that I can say. What's happening at the grassroots with the secret schools right now, and what we're thinking about long term, which is the bigger systemic change, which will take a while. But we have seen some movement in the right direction at the International Court of Justice, for example. If you go on Malala Fund's website, I'm sure there's really interesting links and really interesting research there for you to read so that you can follow us along on our journey. I hope that's satisfactory. I don't lead the work, but that's as much as I can speak to it.
That was super helpful and also insightful to me, Naomi, and how the importance of our words as well, right? Thank you so much to all of you for joining this panel. I've enjoyed our conversation. It is coming to a close. You can stay with us for the rest of this call as we will continue on with our next segments. And I welcome back Ishaan as well. Ishaan, welcome.
Thanks so much. And what a fantastic panel, and great to see partners from different stakeholder groups that we've had a pleasure to work with as well alongside. So it's really great to hear their thoughts and reflections, particularly around the piece on partnerships, on power dynamics, and on more funding and investment in young people, especially young women and girls. So great to hear. And thanks, Inés, for being such an awesome moderator too. And to close our program's formal conversations, Inés and I had the chance to speak with two leaders who truly understand what it means to rewrite the rules of systems that too often exclude young people. First, I sat down with Felipe Paullier, the UN Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs, about how his office, the UN Youth Office, is elevating youth in global policy processes. So I think we can get started and hear from Felipe.
My name is Felipe, and I'm the head of the United Nations Youth Office. I work with an amazing team when it's about trying to make the UN a better place, when it's about working with and for young people.
We're actually only a month after the conclusion of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, which took place in Sevilla in Spain, where we saw youth voices starting to enter major policy areas, talking about issues around reform of our international financial architecture. So Felipe, why is it such a critical moment for young people to talk about and speak up on economic justice? And how did your office, the UN Youth Office, work to bring young people into the FFD4 process?
We are in a pivotal moment of history, because the truth is that young people are not only living, the impact of the decisions in terms of economic justice, but also it's really about them being the ones that have the capacity and the agency to transform this situation, and the truth is that I'm an optimist always, and I have to say that I believe that we are really seeing momentum when it's about the recognition of the role of young people, not only in terms of beneficiaries, of the decisions that institutions make, but also in terms of the role as being change makers, the role as being partners when it's about decisions that affect their lives. The truth is that financing for development, it's a critical platform when it's about policy making, and the truth is that that's why it's so critical that young people are part of these platforms. And that was what we tried to do in this Financing for Development conference in Sevilla, alongside with multiple partners coming from organizations that are in the field, implementing actions, working a lot with civil society and youth organizations, and working with many different parts of the UN. And that's what we're trying to do, not only in Financing for Development as a space, that's what we're trying to do in every key intergovernmental space, because we believe that young people need to have a place in the decision-making process. And we believe that youth issues are cross-cutting issues, youth issues are across all the agendas, and that's why young people are adding value when we are discussing these topics, but also it's their right to have a place when the decisions that will affect them the most are taken,
When we talk about meaningful youth engagement, we know that sort of many young people, particularly in the global south, feel that economic systems and general systems of multilateralism are quite distant, they're quite rigid, they're quite unaccountable to them and the needs of young people. So from your perspective, what are some of the barriers or the biggest barriers that prevent young people and countries in the global south from meaningfully shaping decisions, but also economic decisions that affect their futures?
One thing is not against the other one. I think it's good to recognize that we had made progress, and the truth is that if we compare where we are now than where we were 15 years back, we've done huge progress in terms of the inclusion of young people when it's about decision-making spaces, the recognition of how also we include young people, moving from a paradigm where we consider that what we need to do was just consultations into understanding that it's more than consulting. It's really, when we're talking about participation and a meaningful participation process, it's really about inclusion in every step of the decision-making processes. As you were saying, Ishaan, that many young people still feel, and especially when young people are coming from global south countries, these spaces sometimes remain quite inaccessible because they are highly technical, because sometimes also the discussions are a little bit often even disconnected from what young people are every day of their lives being, experiencing. Removing these structural barriers implies a middle and long-term process and structural transformations, I think that's what we are trying to do since the establishment of the Youth Office. As you know, Ishaan, the UN took almost 78 years to agree among its member states that it was critical to have an entity in the system having a big picture look across how the UN as a whole is engaging young people, and how also this system is delivering for young people, but with their participation, and that's what we're trying to do. You know, this implies structural reforms within how the UN delivers its mandates. You know, and we have a strategy for that, which is the Youth 2030 strategy, which is a mainstream framework when it's about, okay, how to improve the way the UN in every country is trying to implement its actions. But also it implies working a lot with governments, because the decision-making of the UN is based in governments. You know, the UN is an intergovernmental organization. So this implies that the UN is that platform where all the governments of the world come together when it's about taking decisions across global issues, you know. I think my reflection here, Ishaan, is that participation and being engaged with the UN is not only about participating in specific global platforms. You know, I think that engaging with the UN, it's really what we can do when in every country of the world, youth organizations are supporting the UN country teams when it's about all the development priorities at the country level in how the UN is supporting national government.
No, exactly. And I love that point about, making sure that young people are really engaged from, the conceptualization all the way through to the implementation, the monitoring, the governance processes and structures. And remember very well, the leadership of the youth envoys, Ahmed and Jatma, and then also the negotiations that led to the establishment of the youth office. And then also the day that the resolution was passed by consensus in the General Assembly that led to the creation of the UN Youth Office, and really talking about the structural shifts that we need to see across the UN system, but also across the world, and addressing those root causes that enable young people to step into those spaces and positions.
I love that Ishaan got to chat with my current boss, Felipe's insights on how the UN Youth Office is working to engage with young people in shaping the future of the UN. It was so inspiring. And now we would like to hear from you. In just a moment, a poll will launch asking you about priorities for 2030. Specifically, oh, it's popped up now. We want to know, looking ahead to 2030, what would be the top priority for leaders working with young people on technology when implementing the Pact for the future? Now you have a few choices there: investing in digital skills training for all young people, supporting youth-led innovation and startups, ensuring tech is designed with diversity and inclusion in mind, building global agreements on responsible AI use, or making sure technology benefits reach marginalized communities first, especially across the global south. Looking forward to seeing your responses. Pop in the chat before we go to our final conversation of the day, and a little surprise at the end as well. Let's see what comes through. I'll give you a couple more seconds as you take time to fill the poll. It's a hard question to answer. I don't know, Ishaan, what your thoughts are about it.
Yeah, I mean, the Pact for the Future covers everything across the UN system, right? And especially on technology, there's so much to unpack there. I think AI is something that scares me, but there's a lot of potential around it. So I think building global agreements on how to use AI responsibly is pretty important, making sure we're all on the same page, making sure that it's benefiting everyone, making sure that AI is reaching those left furthest behind too, and making sure that we're not using AI to continue to perpetuate inequalities. But I think there's a lot of potential behind AI too. The UN system and young people as well are already leveraging.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'd like to reiterate, it's not that there's one right answer. All of these things should be priority. We're just asking you to prioritize the top one. So maybe we can go to our results now before we finalize with the last conversation. All right, there's a pretty even split, I see. Youth innovation and startups are top, closely followed by investing in digital skills training for all young people, which are both very important things. Thank you for participating in the poll. And while Ishaan spoke to Felipe about youth leadership and global policy, I had the chance to sit down with Amandeep Gill, the UN Secretary General's tech envoy, and our conversation ranged from AI and digital access to his bold U-Patch idea for digital inclusion. Let's go over to that conversation. I am delighted to be hosting this conversation with Mr. Amandeep Singh, who's the Under Secretary General and the United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. He was appointed to that role in June 2022, and since the 1st of January this year, serves as Under Secretary General and Special Envoy for Digital and Emerging Technologies in the newly established United Nations Office for Digital and Emerging Technologies. Amandeep, welcome to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Inés. It's a pleasure.
We're so happy to have you, and we have quite a few questions to get through in a short amount of time. But let me start with a question that comes from young people themselves. For many young people, it's obvious that many global systems were not built with young people in mind, particularly young countries across the global south, where those under 30 make up to 50 or even 80% of the population, and they will be home to the majority of future generations. How does the digital and tech landscape reflect and reinforce these same inequalities?
Absolutely. The digital world, in a way, mirrors and in many cases amplifies the inequalities we see offline. So the digital world is a reflection of our analog world. And for young people in the global south, especially where the majority of the population, as you mentioned, is below 30 years, it can feel like a double whammy. One, that they lack the access to the tools, devices, content that can help them do better in life, unlike their counterparts in the global north. And two, they suffer from the same handicap as young people everywhere, which is that systems of governance, economic systems, political systems sometimes seem alien to them, not designed for them. And often these systems and those who run them behave in a paternalistic manner. And again, there's a striking similarity between the digital world and the analog world. So in the digital world, you have products and services that are rolled out. Look at the smartphones. About 15 years ago, they were designed with adults in mind, and they were put in the hands of younger people without much thought to what they could do to young people and for young people. So it's this kind of paternalism, this kind of lack of thought to how technology, how powerful technological systems impact the youth, that is a concern for us at the United Nations. And as we move into the AI age, as we develop the infrastructure for the future AI economy, the absence of inclusive data sets, the absence of youth in policymaking around AI governance, those are consequential issues. And it's been our attempt at the UN to focus a little bit on these issues of the future that are going to shape the life of youth everywhere.
You've done a perfect segue into what was going to be my next question and is my next question in terms of the AI revolution. You've talked about these systems that seem alien to young people, and many young people do feel left out or even exploited by these systems. How do we make sure the future of tech is ethical, inclusive, and genuinely built with young people in mind?
Absolutely. So we need to reclaim the digital future for young people, and we need to design technological systems, especially the infrastructure around technology, in ways that's inclusive, truly participatory, and rights respecting. So this is one of the core promises of the Global Digital Compact that was adopted at the Summit of the Future last year. And it's a happy coincidence that the Global Digital Compact is one of the two annexes to the Pact for the Future, and the other annex is a declaration on future generations. So these two issues kind of go together in my mind. The Global Digital Compact calls for digital rights protection and promotion. Rights apply online as much as they do offline. It calls for open source AI models, investments in digital public goods and digital public infrastructure, so that innovation doesn't remain locked behind paywalls or monopolies. And for the first time, the GDC brings some decisions on global governance of data and the global governance of AI. So this is a new area for the United Nations, and also a key reason why this office was established. As we build out AI systems, we must pay attention to transparency, accountability, and diversity. So this is at the heart of the Global Digital Compact, which calls for an international independent scientific panel to keep an eye on the development of technology as it evolves rapidly, calls for an inclusive global governance dialogue on AI, and thirdly, calls for a massive global effort to build AI capacity around the world to support countries and make sure that youth are not left behind. Youth need the access to infrastructure so that they are not merely consumers of content, but they are also creators of content. They need the talent development, the skilling, upskilling. That's going to be crucial as the landscape of jobs and opportunities shifts. So we need to be prepared for that. That requires investments in talent. They need the diverse, high quality, context respecting data sets where their voices are represented. They are not excluded from the data sets that are used to develop AI. And lastly, we need to ensure that they have the space to create, to develop projects, products, services that speak to their issues, that help them solve problems in their own context. So we will be taking this forward at the United Nations, these three pillars of the global governance of AI. And we look forward to working with youth innovation networks, coalitions around skills and training programs, so that youth from all regions and not just the elite circles in a few urban areas in a couple of geographies can shape the AI future.
Thank you for also deciding to work with young people. Not everyone does that. And you mentioned a lot of things, so there's a lot to be done. When the Pact for the Future and its annexes were adopted last year at the UN, we were asked to consider the consequences of today's choices on the future at a time when the global system needs an update. So out of everything you've shared, or even additional things from your viewpoint, what needs a reboot most urgently to make international cooperation fit for the future?
I would say we need three things for this reboot. And the first one of them is urgent action to address the digital divide. The digital divide, across all its dimensions, like a funnel. So you have the connectivity divide. Still, more than 2.5 billion people are not connected to the internet. You have the divide in terms of access to devices and content. We saw during the COVID, young people who had access to laptops and desktops did better at online education than those who were struggling with feature phones or basic smartphones. Then we have the divide around data sets, access to data, representation in data, and then finally the AI opportunity. So first priority in rebooting for the future is addressing the digital divide in all its aspects. The second priority is anticipatory governance. So governance fit for the future, in a sense. The technology is developing very fast. Every few months, a number of new models are released, capabilities go through the roof. Some of the video generation today is really lifelike. And those videos are becoming data sets for training robots. So this is the pace of technology that we are faced with. And our governance responses in the public sector, in the policymaking institutions, are very slow. They take years when technology is moving at the speed of light. So we need to kind of close this gap as well between policy responses and the tech development. The third, most importantly, we need to bridge the geopolitical divides. The world is in a very selfish state of mind today. There are tariff wars, there are tech wars, and every country for itself, and I don't care about the others. So at this point in time, I think our real hope is in youth around the world coming together in solidarity, coming together in collaboration to shape the future. So we need the safety net of youth-driven collaboration to be able to reboot the future. So those are the kind of three things that I can think of. Essentially, we have to be more imaginative. We have to be more bold. And I think this energy of imagining things differently, of being bold, can come from the youth.
It certainly does. And I know so many young people on this call today are imaginative and bold and have all these ideas, and they're ready to collaborate. You mentioned earlier the recently adopted Global Digital Compact, or GDC for short. Countries at the UN agreed on shared principles to open, free, and secure digital future for all. And you teased this a little bit, saying that you are opening up spaces. Could you share a bit more of how you're creating those spaces for intergenerational dialogue and action to strengthen digital governance or innovation?
Right. So in our work at the UN, especially at my office, we are building this culture of co-creation, co-imagination, and we are definitely inspired by the GDC's commitment to inclusive governance and multi-stakeholder collaboration across governments, the tech community, civil society, researchers, and youth. So not just talking together, but acting together. An example I can give you is recently at the UN Open Source Week, we hosted a Tech Over, which was a youth-driven hackathon, editathon, and maintain-a-thon. So it was the youth who drove these events. They, of course, worked with mentors from the private sector and from leading open source foundations, but they were able to come together and devise solutions to problems around environment, around what disasters mean for young people. So they developed real projects for digital public infrastructure in AI safety. So this is something that we are doing on a practical basis. And I also work closely with my dear colleague, Felipe, who's the youth envoy, to ensure that when we have these policy reflections related to follow up to the GDC, youth voices are there. To give you an example, in the context of the endorsement of the Global Digital Compact. So we do regular town halls where a community of endorsers from across the globe meets, is given policy updates, and their insights and advice is taken in return. So we have youth representatives, youth networks participating in those spaces. We can, of course, do better and do more. And that's why I'm very, very hopeful that, through you, we will be able to reach out to more youth and then get them to engage more closely with our work at the office, which, by the way, you shouldn't let my gray beard fool you, but it's a very young team at Odette. And the youth in my team drive progress.
That's fantastic. And it's great also that Felipe is also having a conversation with Ishaan on this call. So it's good that you're collaborating on the screen, but also outside of it, and to know that you're connecting with the youth office as well. And I'm sure a lot of people will pick up on the fact that you want to reach out to more youth. So we'll be sharing more information on how they can do that later. You are speaking to a global digital audience of young people right now. Among them, there are coders, designers, and digital advocates, but also creatives and budding policy geeks. If you could pass one patch, like Jacob in the animation, to upgrade how the UN works for the next generation, what would it be?
Okay, so I like to introduce to you the U patch. So this patch would hardwire fairness, inclusion, and youth leadership into everything the UN does on digital and emerging technologies. So what would this do? This would ensure that workers and innovators around AI are protected and treated fairly. Content creators, their IP is treated fairly. Digital transitions come with strong social protection and human rights protection. Tools that are developed are open and accessible, integrated as co-designers of UN digital projects and policy initiatives. So in sum, what is this patch? And this powerful patch isn't something that comes just from the UN. It's not something that'll just come from today's leaders of countries or companies. It won't be a reboot button or a cheat code. It is essentially you, the empowerment of the next generation of coders, creators, policymakers, and artists. You will not just update the system, you will reimagine it, and we are here to support you every step of the way.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you and your team for all you're doing to support those fairer digital futures and also for making sure it's being done in an intergenerational way. I've surely enjoyed our conversation. Please let us know in the chat if there are any thoughts that you have on what patch you would want to create for the future or pass. And I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future so that we can collaborate more with you and your office. Thank you so much, Amandeep.
Thank you, Inés. It's a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you all for staying on for this conversation as well. I do see there are some questions in the chat. Unfortunately, due to the time, we won't be able to take them today, but I encourage you to take them over to the Discord to make sure the conversation keeps going. Before we go, we do have one more thing to celebrate. Our challenge winners from the Engine Room's Beat the System campaign. Over the past 4 weeks, young people from around the world have responded to prompts tied to each episode of the Economy Reboot. They've reflected on unjust systems, imagined bold alternatives, and submitted everything from essays to memes to animations. Each response earned them an XP in our Discord community, which I just mentioned. And today, we're also giving a special shout out to the top contributors whose reflections really stood out.
So first up, from week 1, the challenge prompt that we asked was, what part of the system feels rigged against young people and how would you change it? And our winner is Kubotso Radebe, who challenged the myth of accessible education, called out the crushing weight of student debt in the global south, and called for universal access to quality education for all.
Congratulations, Kapotso, and you were part of our Engine Room last year as well, so it's great to see you there. I want to give a special shout out to Arpan, Aisha, Agnes, and Epiphany, who also had thoughtful contributions.
And the second week, from week 2, the challenge asked, what's one bug in today's economic system and how would you debug it? And our winner is Ajiro Ogene Paul, who pointed to the existence of tax havens as a major barrier to equity and proposed that solutions are a combination of bottom-up and grassroots-led approaches that really inform top-down global reforms to address systemic economic inequalities.
Incredible work. And again, shout out to Agnes, Aisha, and Epiphany for their creative entries as well.
So with episode 3 now launched, we invite you to join in on the Discord to tackle challenge 3. It's an artistic challenge. So since we invite you to paint a picture of what a rebooted economic system would look like in one rule, one idea, or one vision. I can't wait to see your creations, and the winner for week 3 will be announced in our next quarterly magazine and across all our social media channels.
We will close with one final treat. Joshua is back with a special song to end the celebration. Happy International Youth Day to everyone.
reminding us that the cleanest source of energy was always above us and never below. Although there's a challenge in letting go, we must focus on building a sustainable energy flow. It's not hard to see. We need EVs, PVs, and LEDs, batteries, efficiency, and R&D. We can transform the world's carbon intensity, yet there tends to be a tendency for us to say that politically, realistically, the feasibility is grey. But political will itself is a renewable resource. We just have to rearrange our course and interchange our power source. A green future is a human right, and if humans are right, we should all unite and collectively decide to choose the side of no divide, which happens to coincide with our motto, It's not united in adversity, it's united in diversity. Now, more than ever, we need to insulate our homes and our democracies. Stop taking future generation loans and start with real long-term policies. We need to build heat pumps and public trust. Stop turning ecosystems into garbage dumps and start making the energy transition truly just. We need to decarbonize our economy and deconstruct silos, because we are more than a net zero wannabe with good bylaws. Here comes the sun. But we are choking on the flames of a disease called externalities. Yes, we are sick with the flu called CO2. Here comes the sun, but our energy still burns futures before they begin. We call transitional fossil fuels a win, not a sin, and our atmosphere gets thin, while we keep playing to the violin of lobbyists, not citizens. Here comes the sun, but the only thing that's rising faster than the sun is our sea level. And we look the devil in the eye and say, it's a good day. The sun is out, coal subsidies are in, but don't worry, it's a win-win because we can sequester the carbon. I beg your pardon? Carbon capture to solve the climate crisis while ignoring and fossil fuel consumption still rises is like burning all the trees in the spring, so the forest fire doesn't take them in the summer. So business as usual is delusional. We try to price the planet in burnout, like you could PayPal your way out of a drought. And if a climate hazard generates a steady cash flow, investment banks will think about the IPO. Because for some, green is just greed with a typo. ESG is a nice portfolio add-on, but we can't buy the Amazon on Amazon if it's gone. And same-day shipping won't stop our climate from tipping. But we are tolerant when a conglomerate bottles our rivers in plastic containers. I'm just speechless, because there are a couple of things that should be no-brainers. We shouldn't need a PhD to see that clean air should be free. We shouldn't need a keynote speaker to know the Gulf Stream's getting weaker. You don't need a Nobel Prize to see our glaciers vaporize. Because innovation without regulation is just acceleration without foundation. And a mission without action is just ambition without traction. Let's solve this in time. I know, I won't do it on my own with a rhyme, but we can do it together, hands intertwined, standing strong, without being wrong. Here comes the sun, reminding us that the cleanest source of energy was always above us and never below. And it's not hard to see. We need EVs, PVs and LEDs, batteries, efficiency and R&D. We can transform the world's carbon intensity, yet there tends to be a tendency for us to say that politically, realistically, the feasibility is great. But political will itself is a renewable resource. We just have to rearrange our course and interchange our power source. A green future is a human right. And if humans are right, we should all unite and collectively decide to choose the side of no divide. And I think we should abide by a new motto. United in certainty, united in urgency, united in diversity.